Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. My name is Kellen with Apex Archery and we are continuing our series looking at longer axle-to-axle flagship hunting bows for 2024. Today, in the studio and on test, we have the aluminum offering from Hoyt, the Alpha X 33. Very excited to get shooting on this bow. Let's get into it. Hello everyone and welcome again to the channel. My name is Kellen with Apex Archery and today we are digging into the Alpha X 33 from Hoyt, one of a handful of flagship models, this one coming in with an aluminum riser design. This is a 33-inch axle-to-axle model boasting a brace height of 6 3/8 of an inch. The claimed system weight for this bow is 4.75 pounds with a claimed speed for ATA of 334 feet per second. This new HBX exact cam system will accommodate draw lengths from 26 out to 31 inches across 3 different mods that come with the bow and are aimed really to optimize efficiency across that draw length range. And the MSRP on this bow is $1,449. Before we go any further, I want to pause to give a quick shout out and thank you to a friend of the channel, and that is Bear Creek Archery in Inglewood, Colorado. They happen to be my home shop that I trust for all of my archery needs. They also are kind enough to be donating so far all of the bows that we've had on test and in studio so far this year. If you are traveling through Colorado, happen to live here, and you have any archery needs whatsoever, please stop in and see my friends over at Bear Creek Archery. All right, I'm excited. Let's go ahead and dig into verifying the various specs of this particular bow. First thing we're going to do is look into the axle-to-axle measurement here, and we are looking for exactly 33 inches. This one, from center of axle to center of axle, is coming in a little bit long at 33 3/8 of an inch. Next up, let's go ahead and actually check into that brace height. So if I do measure to the center of the string, from the deepest part of the throat of the grip. This one is coming in a little bit long there as well. That is closer to 6 7/16 of an inch. So getting close to about 6.5 inches on that brace height. Next, we're actually going to look into the overall riser design and the riser length. Remember, I like a long riser relative to an axle-to-axle on any given platform. I think of the riser itself as almost my vertical orientation stabilizer. The longer that riser, the more it's really forcing mass out away from my hands and the arrow or the central shooting position of the bow and helping me to remain very stable when I am on target and at full draw. So if I measure to the pivot point here, including the supporting limb pocket, which is what I'm doing for all the bows this year, I do get exactly 30 inches. So decent, but not ultra long riser. That does give us a riser to axle ratio on this bow of 89.9%. So, in the bottom half of the various bows that we've tested so far this year. Next, and speaking of that pivot point, let's go ahead and look into the actual reflex measurement. So remember, reflex is important because all other things being equal, a larger reflex value is going to mean more impact of torque applied to the grip on where your arrow actually lands on target. So we want within reason to keep that reflex measurement as small as is possible. So from that pivot point to the deepest part of the throat of the grip, I am coming up with exactly 2 1/4 inches. So a little bit on the longer side, but within keeping for a lot of other hunting bows that are out on the market currently. Next, let's go ahead and check the actual weight of this system. Remember, Hoyt is claiming that this should be coming in at 4.75 pounds. And this one is coming in a little bit heavy. It is coming in at exactly 5.00 pounds, so exactly 5 pounds. So coming in about 1/4 pound heavier than what they had advertised. Last but not least, let's look into the actual width of the limb package itself. Remember, a lot of different manufacturers are moving to a wider and wider limb stance, claiming that that is going to increase stability at full draw. Using our calipers here, that is coming in at exactly 2 7/8 of an inch. So a nice wide limb stance within that particular design. All right, with all of that verified, why don't I go ahead and throw a rest on this bow, meet me out on the range, and we will talk about the shooting performance of the Alpha X 33. All right, we are outside now with the aluminum flagship offering from Hoyt, the Alpha X 33. We've already had on test so far this year the RX8 Ultra, which has the same cam system and an overall kind of similar design aesthetic. That said, very curious to see how their aluminum offering shoots. I also have a great deal of experience shooting the carbon lineup from Hoyt. Very little experience with their aluminum bows. Interesting draw cycle. It feels like it stacks much earlier than the RX8 Ultra and eases off for about the last half. Sound to my ear seems like it's going to come in within range of most of the other bows that we've had on test so far this year. There is a little bit of vibration on the shot. It feels pretty high amplitude, but it falls away in about a second, so it doesn't hang around for a long time. As a caveat, as is always the case, we are removing the stubby stabilizer that does come as a stock option from the folks over at Hoyt. We're doing that for all of the bows this year. If the primary purpose of the accessory is really to be a weight or a stabilizer, we're removing it. We're not removing things like the shock pods or things that are really dedicated to vibration dampening. And I do have this guy set with the firmer of the two back wall settings. Yeah, an overall smooth draw, but it does stack more aggressively. Decent string angle, not bad. Very firm back wall. I mean, I have to add 30 pounds of pressure before I get even a couple millimeters of movement. And again, just a little bit of vibration that I suspect is going to be cleaned up once you add your accessories to the overall bow itself. Very smooth into the last half of that draw cycle, but again, just stacks a little more aggressively. Love the engaged grip. If you are going to shoot with a rubberized or insulated grip, it's hard to go wrong with the offering from Hoyt. I think that they do a tremendous job, and it happens to fit my hand incredibly well. That little kind of thumb cut out there in that shelf really creates an ultra repeatable place for me to put my hand, although I will say overall, I do prefer a target style grip. Really interesting offering. Very excited to get this thing on the actual drawboard and take a look at some of the dynamic specifications. Even more interested to put this on the dyno to get the draw force curve. We may even do a comparison between this and the RX8 Ultra because they share that same cam system, because to my feel, they do seem kind of distinct and different, which is interesting coming from the same manufacturer. All right, we are back inside out of that very admirable shooting performance for the Hoyt Alpha X33 out on the range. Now we have this guy thrown onto our drawboard and in the full draw position. We want to get a sense for some of the dynamic specifications and how that equates to the shooting performance that we did achieve. One of the first things that I'm going to compliment Hoyt on and also measure is the actual string to string measurement for this bow. I say compliment because I very much like what they're doing with their HBX exact cams this year. It really seems to suspend and support that string way out away from that axle and the deflection point when we are at full draw, which should give us a fairly generous string angle on this particular bow. So on this cam system, that string is supported out to about this point on the actual cam itself at full draw. So if I do measure from that point to the same point on the other side, I am coming up with 34 3/4 of an inch for that string to string measurement at full draw. The next thing we're going to look into is the updated axle to axle measurement and how much deflection are we actually getting out of the limb system for this bow. So again, if we go center of axle to center of axle, I am getting exactly 30 7/8 of an inch. That gives us a total deflection of 2.5 inches. Pretty moderate for a bow in a hunting application. Next, let's go ahead and actually check into that string angle. And remember, that is a measurement that I care very much about, in particular because as a taller archer, I'm trying to keep a very vertical spine and neck position and find my reference points easily when I am at full draw and at my anchor. Having a slacker or larger string angle is going to be very helpful, again, for finding those reference points easily without feeling like I have to lean into the string to find it. So if I do measure from, effectively center of arrow through that knocking point and the center of that string, I am coming up with exactly 38.5 degrees. Really very generous. I think one of the larger string angles we've had so far for a 33-inch axle-to-axle bow. Next, let's look into the actual draw length. Remember, a lot of manufacturers that we've had in so far this year are coming in a little bit long on that ultimate draw length. That's going to equate to a little bit more speed out on the range, but archers are going to need to make adjustments, be it to the D-loop or their actual draw stops here, to actually find a true draw length. Fortunately, this Hoyt is actually coming on exactly at that 30-inch mark. So very, very honest measurement coming in at 30 inches of draw length on the Alpha X 33. Ultimately, that draw length combined with our brace height, which we had mentioned earlier, is going to give us a total power stroke on this bow of 23 9/16 of an inch. We had a chance to run this particular bow through the actual dyno to generate a draw force curve, and I think we got one of the more interesting draw force curves that we've had on test so far this year, and we'll talk about why I think that in just a moment. First, looking at the actual draw cycle, it does require 1,193.6, what we're calling kind of inch pounds, or the accumulated force required to get through that entire draw cycle for this particular bow. Now if we add, though, our hashes that indicate the 25, 50, 75, and 100% for that actual draw cycle graph, we can see why I think that this is so interesting. It does get to that actual peak weight at about the 28% mark, but it actually just stays at peak weight from about that 28% to that 50% mark before actually beginning the let-off into the valley. It does ultimately arrive home at 13.3 pounds of actual holding weight, giving us an actual let-off in the 80% position of 81%. But again, it begins that let-off at about that halfway point and for the entire back half of the actual draw cycle itself, which is much earlier than what we're seeing from a lot of other bows, including from another bow produced by Hoyt and that we've had on test so far this year. Ultimately, why that's really, really interesting is it actually rolls over very smoothly despite stacking quite aggressively up front. It's also going to make this bow very, very easy in a hunting application for a letdown scenario. And that's because, again, you're going to be able to begin that letdown process and not have to fight against peak weight until you're about halfway through that letdown procedure. So one thing that I thought might be very curious, because this does feel distinct and different to me from the RX-8 Ultra that we've also had on test and that shares the HBX Exact cam system with this bow, is to actually do a side-by-side comparison of the draw force curves for those two bows. Out on the range, I had mentioned that I felt like this may be stacked a little bit more aggressively than the RX-8 Ultra, and I was correct, but only by function of the difference in the brace heights. As we can see, the actual climb angle to that peak weight is very similar between those two bows. But again, this gets there a little bit faster simply because it does have that shorter brace height, and therefore you actually start the power stroke a little bit earlier or a little bit further away from your anchor position. That said, the RX-8 is more conventional in that it actually holds that peak weight much further into the draw cycle, whereas again, this begins that letdown process at about that halfway mark. That said, between these two bows, they actually require the same amount of energy from the archer. They store about the same amount of energy then in the actual draw cycle itself, coming in within 0.3% of one another. With all of that analyzed, what I'm very curious to do is actually get this guy back out on the range to do some speed testing against that draw cycle. Let me grab my 350, 400, and 450 grain arrows. Meet me back outside and we will see what kind of speeds we're able to get out of the Alpha X 33. All right, we are stepping back out on the range with the Alpha X 33 after taking a look at what is ultimately one of the more interesting draw force curves we've had all year. Very excited to see how that overall kind of design metric placed into this HBX Exact Cam to produce that draw force curve from those engineers is going to ultimately translate into speeds out on the range. As is always the case, we did go ahead and double check and verify. This is set to the 80% let off position, exactly 30 inches of draw length, and it is pulling 69.92 pounds on our hand scale, so set very close to that 70-pound mark. This first arrow weighs exactly 350 grains. Let's see what kind of speeds we're able to get at that ATA spec. That first arrow going 322.5 feet per second. Next up is a 400 grain arrow. That going 304.3 feet per second. And last but not least is a 450 grain arrow, so now getting much closer to a true hunting weight, or what we would expect people to use in the field. That arrow going 286.3 feet per second. All things considered, pretty decent speeds coming out of the HBX Exact Cam system in the Alpha X 33. All right, we are back inside with the Alpha X33 after getting fairly respectable speeds out on the range, again set to that ATA spec of 70 pounds with a 350 grain arrow. As is always the case, we were able to grab several different 350 grain arrows and shoot over the chronograph a total of 8 times, building ultimately a very tight average of 322.8 feet per second. So that is the official speed that we are going to give this particular bow going into 2024. All of that speed is coming to us via the all-new HBX Exact Cam system from Hoyt. This is going to accommodate draw lengths between 26 out to 31 inches, and what's cool this year is that is available in quarter-inch increments across 3 different mods that are available for this cam system. I like that because it allows the archer to kind of fine-tune and tinker, whether they're changing out their D-loop and have a slightly different size, or maybe moving to a different release, and ultimately to dial into a draw length that is just about perfect for them. I also like that it is a partial mod-based system because that allows the engineers to actually optimize different draw length increments to give us peak performance, across that entire draw length range coming out of the exact same cam system. Speaking of adjustability, they are carrying forward, just like with the RX-8 Ultra, with this little peg here that is machined onto the end of that module and does provide us with 75, 80, and 85% let-off options, as well as with 2 different back wall settings. I did shoot this in the extra firm or the extra hard back wall setting and found it to be very, very stiff, which would be my preference. But if you do like just a little bit more give in the back wall, you can have that by moving that to just the hard setting rather than the extra hard. So really nice to see all of that adjustability coming out of that brand new cam system for Hoyt this year. That cam is suspended through those limbs with an axle system that no longer uses a C-clip or E-clip, but rather just a Torx wrench to actually work on that different axle assembly. So I know a lot of different shop workers are very much going to appreciate that they're not going to have E-clips flinging all over their shop. And then you can make all of your wheeling and left-right adjustments for paper tuning by way of a shim system on that actual axle assembly. As far as different peak weights, this will accommodate from 40 pounds all the way out to 80 pounds of peak draw across 5 different limb options. So you can have this with peak weight 50, 60, 65, 70, and 80 pound limbs. And then of course you can use your limb bolt turns to dial down off of that peak weight to the tune of about 10 pounds of adjustability once you get those limbs installed and selected. Moving into the actual riser itself, I really like the aesthetic and a lot of the machining work that Hoyt has done on this bow for this year. They've created kind of this double bridge design that feels very stiff and ultimately doing, again, a lot of that machining legwork to try to get some of the weight out of this particular bow. Talking about the grip, they're carrying forward with that very successful Engage grip that, again, insofar as you are talking about like an ergonomic or insulated grip, it just fits my hand really well. This little kind of thumb catch or thumb cutout here creates a very repeatable shooting position for me, so I like that very much. And then if you do want more of that target style grip, you can of course remove that and replace it with side plates to again get that slimmer profile for more of that target feel. They are continuing with a machined dovetail interface here on the back of the actual riser, allowing for integrate style rests, bringing some of the some of the mass of that rest kind of to the center line of the actual riser itself. And then similarly, they are continuing with their Picatinny mount machined into that riser, allowing you lots of different directly integrated sight options from plenty of different manufacturers available again for 2024 in this riser design. Moving down a little bit, they are carrying forward with their dual position stabilizer mounts off the front there. And then it does come in the box with this stubby stabilizer. It has some weights suspended by a little bit of rubber and elastomer. Again, adding a little bit of mass and lowering kind of the center of mass of that bow if you have it in that lower position, while also promising to dissipate a little bit of vibration on the shot. They might need that because we did detect a little bit of vibration on the shot out of this particular bow, and they have also removed the limb dampeners that used to come stock and standard on their bows, again, trying to take a little bit of weight out of the system overall. Speaking of vibration and moving into shot volume now, we did have a chance to take this outside and to do our standard decibel meter testing. So to do that, we are always kind of outside in open air conditions, shooting a 400 grain arrow at ATA spec. We do place our directional and accurate decibel meter exactly 3 horizontal feet from the central shooting position. And we did get tied for the loudest on test, coming in at 81.5 decibels. So coming in, about 2 decibels louder than some of the other bows that we've had on test as far as kind of the average is concerned. Ultimately, I don't think it's going to be terribly noticeable, but it is worth noting that this is tied currently for the loudest bow that we've had on test and in studio so far. Speaking again, though, of those actual stabilizer positions, I wanted to show off a very cool aftermarket accessory that is available from Hoyt, and that is their Go Sticks 2.0. So that attaches to that lower mount position, and when you loosen these two kind of set screws here, you can actually adjust those legs into predefined positions to create a 3 contact point surface in using that back cam assembly as well, to allow you to just kind of set that bow down and leave it without actually putting the cam in the dirt. And then again, just to show you on that HBX exact cam on the bottom cam there, they do machine in this little kind of piece of aluminum here with a rubber gasket around it, creating that 3rd contact point. So a really nice feature from Hoyt that may work with some of the other manufacturers that are also including that lower stabilizer position. Of note, what's cool about this overall design is it does allow you to use those spring-loaded feet to move those legs into positions that might be easier to carry out in the field, or might be really easy to kind of store when you actually have it in your bow case or you have this bow in transit. So you don't actually need to remove those Go Sticks in order to kind of keep it on there and just kind of travel with your bow, be it through the brush or in your case. So a really, really cool evolution of the Go Sticks platform. And again, that is an aftermarket accessory option from Hoyt this year. So that is the Alpha X 33. All things considered, a very interesting and respectable aluminum flagship offering coming from the folks over at Hoyt this year, and again coming to you at an MSRP of $1,449. If you enjoyed this review, please think about subscribing to our channel, give us a like, or meet us over on Instagram. We are going to continue our search looking at all of the different reviews for longer axle-to-axle flagship hunting bows for 2024. That will ultimately turn into a review of reviews where we collect all of this objective data, sit down, and make our determination for our first ever Apex Archery Bow of the Year. I hope to see you on the next one. Thanks so much.